A veteran moved into a forgotten cottage. His German shepherd found a hidden fortune. What hidden fortune could possibly be waiting inside a forgotten cottage? And what led the German shepherd to find it when no one else ever did? Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are truly grateful that you are here to spend part of your day with us. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with mystery, loyalty, and unforgettable moments, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new adventure. Thank you for your continued support and for helping this community grow with every story we share. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from anywhere in the world, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, settle in, relax, and let us begin the story. The old cottage was supposed to be empty, but someone had been waiting inside for decades. When Ethan Calloway first saw the forgotten cottage standing beside the quiet Montana woods, he did not see a treasure waiting to be found. He saw a place where he could finally begin again. After leaving military service, the veteran wanted a simpler life away from crowded cities and constant noise. The small wooden home sat beside a peaceful lake, surrounded by tall pine trees, wild grass, and years of untouched memories. The paint had faded, the porch boards had aged, and ivy covered parts of the stone foundation, but Ethan felt something familiar about the quiet property. It felt less like an abandoned house and more like a place waiting for someone to listen. Beside him walked Duke, his German shepherd, moving carefully through the fallen leaves with calm curiosity. The loyal dog had been Ethan's companion through many seasons of change, always offering silent support without needing words. Duke explored every corner of the cottage grounds while Ethan carried boxes through the front door and began turning the forgotten home into a place of comfort. Inside, the cottage held the scent of old wood, fireplace ash, and memories left behind by previous generations. Sunlight passed through dusty windows, creating golden patterns across the wooden floor. An old bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with weathered books that had not been touched in years. A small kitchen remained exactly as it seemed to have been left, with vintage cabinets, faded dishes, and handwritten notes tucked inside drawers. Ethan did not mind the age of the cottage. In fact, he appreciated every imperfect detail. After years of following schedules and responsibilities, he found peace in repairing small things one at a time. Each repaired window, cleaned room, and restored piece of furniture felt like another step toward building a new chapter. Yet Duke seemed interested in something Ethan could not understand. Every morning, shortly after sunrise, the German shepherd walked through the cottage and stopped beside the same section of the living room floor. He would stand quietly, looking down at the wooden boards before turning back toward Ethan. At first, Ethan smiled and thought Duke simply liked the warmest spot in the room. But after several mornings, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The dog always returned to the exact same place. The same corner, the same old wooden floorboard beneath the faded rug. One evening, while rain tapped gently against the cottage windows, Ethan moved the rug aside and examined the floor. Nothing appeared unusual. The boards were old but solid. There were no visible markings, no loose pieces, and no obvious reason for Duke's attention. The veteran ran his hand across the surface and wondered what his loyal companion sensed. Duke quietly lowered his head and touched his nose near a small gap between two boards. Then he looked back at Ethan with patient eyes, almost as if waiting for him to notice something hidden in plain sight. Ethan turned off the lights and listened to the peaceful silence surrounding the cottage. Outside, the wind moved softly through the pine trees while the lake reflected the moonlight. The forgotten home no longer felt empty. It felt like a place carrying a story. And somewhere beneath those old wooden floors, a secret was waiting for the right moment to finally be discovered. The cottage remained quiet, but Ethan Calloway was beginning to understand that silence did not always mean emptiness. Some places carried memories in ways people could not explain, and this old home beside the Montana woods seemed to hold more questions than answers. Each morning, the same pattern continued. Before Ethan finished his coffee, Duke would walk slowly across the living room, stop beside the faded rug, and lower his head toward the wooden floor. The German shepherd never scratched, never barked, and never showed signs of impatience. He simply waited. That quiet certainty made Ethan more curious with every passing day. The veteran had learned throughout his life that small details often revealed the things others overlooked. So instead of ignoring Duke's unusual habit, he decided to study the cottage itself. He began searching through old records left behind by the previous owner. Inside a dusty cabinet near the fireplace, Ethan discovered a collection of handwritten notes, faded photographs, and property documents carefully tied together with an old leather strap. The papers revealed that the cottage had belonged to the same family for nearly 70 years before being forgotten after the last owner moved away. Most of the documents described ordinary details about repairs, seasonal changes, and memories created inside the home. But one photograph caught Ethan's attention. It showed the cottage many years earlier, surrounded by a beautifully maintained garden and a small wooden workshop behind the house. In the background stood a stone fireplace extension that no longer appeared on the current property records. Ethan looked toward the living room fireplace and noticed something unusual. The stonework around the fireplace seemed older than the rest of the cottage, almost like it belonged to another time. Duke followed his gaze immediately and walked toward the fireplace with the same calm focus he had shown near the floor. Ethan knelt beside the stone surface and carefully examined every detail. Most of the stones were covered with years of dust, but one section appeared slightly different. The color was deeper. The edges were cleaner. It looked as though someone had once opened and closed that area many times. Before making any assumptions, Ethan returned to the old documents. He found a small handwritten note tucked between 2 pages of a family journal. The writing was faded but still readable. It mentioned a safe place beneath the heart of the home, and a reminder that what matters most should be protected until the right person arrives. Ethan read the sentence twice. He did not know what it meant, but the words felt connected to the strange behavior he had witnessed from Duke. That evening, rain covered the windows with gentle patterns while Ethan sat beside the fireplace studying the old photograph. Duke rested near his feet, peaceful and patient. The veteran thought about how easily people ignored things they did not understand. A forgotten cottage, an aging document, a quiet dog watching the same place every morning. Each detail seemed ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a question that Ethan could no longer ignore. The next morning, he carefully removed the old rug from the living room floor and examined the boards beneath it once again. This time, he noticed something hidden near the edge of the fireplace. A thin line in the wood followed a perfect shape, almost invisible beneath years of dust. Ethan brushed the surface gently and discovered a small metal ring built into the floor. He looked at Duke, who simply sat beside him with calm eyes. The German shepherd had not found the answer. He had only led Ethan to the first clue. And beneath the quiet cottage that everyone had forgotten, another secret was beginning to reveal itself. The small metal ring hidden beside the fireplace remained untouched for several minutes, as Ethan Calloway simply studied it in the soft morning light. The cottage was silent except for the gentle crackle of the old fireplace and the distant sound of wind moving through the pine trees outside. Duke sat nearby, watching patiently as if he already knew the next step, but was willing to wait for Ethan to discover it himself. The veteran had spent years making careful decisions under pressure, but this moment felt different. There was no urgency, no need to rush, only curiosity and respect for a mystery that had been waiting quietly beneath the floorboards. Ethan carefully lifted the metal ring. At first, nothing happened. The old wood remained perfectly still, but after a gentle pull, he felt a slight movement beneath the surface. A hidden section of flooring slowly shifted upward, revealing a narrow opening concealed beneath years of dust and forgotten memories. A cool stream of air rose from below, carrying the faint scent of stone, aged wood, and a place untouched by sunlight for many years. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from his workbench and carefully looked into the opening. Beneath the living room floor was a small staircase built from stone and reinforced wood. It was not part of the original cottage plans he had found in the documents. Someone had intentionally created this hidden space and then covered it so completely that it disappeared from memory. Duke stood beside the opening, looking down into the darkness with calm attention. Ethan smiled softly. "You knew this was here all along, didn't you?" The German shepherd simply looked back at him before turning toward the hidden stairs. The veteran descended slowly, making sure every step was stable before continuing downward. The narrow passage led beneath the cottage foundation, where the temperature was noticeably cooler than above. The walls were carefully built, not like a temporary hiding place, but like a room designed to protect something important. Along one side of the passage, faded markings were carved into the stone. They were not random scratches. They appeared to be symbols or notes left by someone who had built the space many years earlier. At the bottom of the stairs, Ethan entered a small chamber illuminated only by the beam of his flashlight. Wooden shelves lined the walls, most of them empty except for a few carefully preserved boxes wrapped in old fabric. In the center of the room stood a simple wooden table covered with a layer of dust. On top rested a small envelope sealed with dark wax. Ethan approached slowly. The envelope carried no name, only a handwritten message on the front. For the person who finds what was forgotten. The words made him pause. This was not a random hidden room. Someone had expected that one day another person would discover it. Ethan carefully opened the envelope and found a folded piece of paper inside. The handwriting matched the old notes he had discovered earlier in the cabinet. The message explained that the cottage had once belonged to a family who believed certain possessions should be protected until they could be returned to the people who deserved them. It mentioned a collection stored beneath the home, but the rest of the message was incomplete. Several lines had faded away with time, leaving only fragments of a larger story. Ethan searched the chamber carefully and discovered a second clue carved into the wooden table. A small symbol matched one found on the old photograph behind the fireplace. Beneath the symbol were 3 simple words: "Look beyond stone." Duke suddenly moved toward the far wall and stopped beside a section of stone that appeared slightly different from the rest. Ethan followed him and brushed away the dust. Behind the surface, he discovered a faint outline of another hidden mechanism. The cottage had not revealed everything yet. It had only opened the first door. And somewhere beyond that stone wall, another secret was waiting. The hidden mechanism behind the stone wall was unlike anything Ethan Calloway had expected to find beneath the forgotten cottage. He stood quietly in the underground chamber, his flashlight moving slowly across the carefully placed stones while Duke remained beside him, watching with the same calm patience that had guided him from the beginning. The air beneath the cottage felt untouched by time. It carried the scent of cool earth, aged wood, and forgotten memories preserved in silence. Ethan carefully examined the faint outline hidden behind the stone surface. It was not a crack or a natural opening. It was a carefully designed section built into the wall, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. The symbol carved beside it matched the one from the old photograph and the marking on the wooden table. The clues were finally beginning to connect. The veteran gently pressed the center of the symbol, expecting nothing more than another old mystery. Instead, he felt a slight movement beneath his fingers. A small section of stone shifted inward, revealing a narrow compartment hidden inside the wall. Within the space rested a bundle wrapped in protective cloth. Ethan carefully removed it and placed it on the wooden table under the soft beam of his flashlight. Inside was a collection of handwritten journals, old maps, and carefully preserved documents. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing remained surprisingly clear. The first journal belonged to a man named Thomas Whitaker, one of the original owners of the cottage nearly 100 years earlier. Ethan slowly turned through the pages, discovering that the cottage had once been more than a simple home. It had been a place where important family records, personal belongings, and valuable items were protected during uncertain times. Thomas had written about a promise made between generations. Certain possessions were never meant to be hidden forever. They were only meant to be protected until someone trustworthy could return them to their rightful place. Duke quietly approached the table and rested near Ethan as he continued reading. The journal described a hidden collection stored beneath the cottage, but it also explained that the value of those items was not measured only by money. Many objects represented family histories, forgotten achievements, and memories belonging to people who had disappeared from public records over the years. Ethan paused at one particular entry. Thomas had written about a final instruction for whoever discovered the hidden chamber. Protect what is not yours. Restore what was lost. The words stayed with Ethan. He had expected a mystery. He had expected perhaps an old collection or forgotten valuables. He had not expected a responsibility. Near the bottom of the bundle, Ethan found a detailed map of the cottage property. Unlike the modern survey documents, this map showed areas of the land that no longer appeared on official records. Behind the cottage was a small structure marked only with a simple symbol. The location matched an overgrown section of the property where Ethan had noticed old stone foundations covered by years of plants and fallen branches. Duke lifted his head as Ethan studied the map. The German shepherd looked toward the underground entrance, as if reminding him that every discovery had always been connected. Ethan folded the map carefully and returned the documents to their protective wrapping. He knew he could not continue searching without proper preparation. The hidden room beneath the cottage was not a place for excitement or careless exploration. It was a place that deserved respect. Before leaving the chamber, Ethan took one final look around. The empty shelves, the old table, and the hidden symbols all told the same story. Someone had waited many years for the right person to arrive. Back above ground, the evening sun painted the cottage walls with warm golden light. The forgotten home no longer felt abandoned. It felt like a carefully guarded piece of history that had finally found someone willing to listen. Ethan looked at Duke resting beside the fireplace and smiled. The loyal German shepherd had not discovered a fortune. He had discovered a path, and that path was leading them towards something far greater hidden beneath the old cottage grounds. The morning after discovering the hidden chamber beneath the cottage, Ethan Calloway woke before sunrise with a feeling he had not experienced in years. It was not excitement alone. It was a sense of responsibility. The forgotten cottage beside the Montana woods was no longer just a quiet place where he hoped to rebuild his life. It had become a doorway into a story that had been waiting for someone patient enough to uncover it. Duke was already awake when Ethan entered the living room. The German shepherd stood beside the old fireplace, looking toward the floor where the hidden entrance was located. Ethan smiled softly. "You really knew something was here, didn't you?" Duke simply watched him with calm eyes before walking toward the back door. The loyal dog had a way of guiding without demanding attention. That morning, Ethan decided to follow the old property map and investigate the overgrown area behind the cottage. The location marked on the faded paper was nearly impossible to recognize. Decades of wild grass, fallen branches, and changing seasons had erased most signs of what once existed there. Ethan walked slowly across the property with Duke beside him, carrying the map carefully in his hand. After several minutes, Duke stopped near a group of old stones covered with moss. Ethan looked around and noticed something unusual. The stones were arranged too carefully to be natural. They formed the remains of a small foundation hidden beneath years of growth. As he cleared away some leaves and plants, he uncovered the edge of an old wooden structure. It was not a building anymore, only the preserved remains of something that had once stood behind the cottage. Inside the structure, Ethan discovered another collection of forgotten items. Unlike the hidden chamber beneath the house, this place contained objects that felt personal. Old photographs, handwritten letters, family records, and carefully wrapped packages filled wooden containers protected from the weather. Each item seemed connected to the people who had lived there before. Ethan spent hours reading the documents and slowly piecing together the history of the cottage. The Whitaker family had not simply owned the property. They had created a place where memories, traditions, and valuable possessions were protected through generations. But over time, family members moved away, records were lost, and the cottage eventually became forgotten. Among the documents, Ethan discovered references to a collection that had been carefully preserved beneath the property. The notes suggested that some items held significant financial value, but the family always considered their history more important than their price. One document mentioned a collection of rare valuables stored for safekeeping during a difficult period nearly a century earlier. Ethan looked at the words carefully. He understood that whatever was hidden below the cottage was not simply a discovery. It was part of someone's life story. Later that afternoon, Ethan contacted a local historian and explained what he had found. He avoided making assumptions and shared only the facts supported by the documents. The historian agreed that the records appeared important and suggested that experts should examine everything properly. Ethan appreciated that advice. He had spent his life believing that doing the right thing mattered more than personal gain. As evening arrived, Ethan returned to the cottage with Duke walking beside him. The veteran sat on the porch and looked across the quiet land. The lake reflected the orange colors of the setting sun, and the old cottage stood peacefully among the trees. A place that had once been forgotten was slowly revealing its story. Duke rested his head near Ethan's hand, and the veteran gently placed his hand on the dog's fur. The German Shepherd had followed a trail that no person had noticed. But the greatest discovery was not what waited beneath the ground. It was the reminder that some things are hidden not because they are lost, but because they are waiting for someone worthy to find them. The days following Ethan Callaway's discovery beneath the forgotten cottage were filled with quiet preparation. The veteran understood that some discoveries were not meant to be rushed into the world without care. The old journals, family records, and hidden documents told a story that belonged to more than one person. They represented generations of memories, promises, and a history that had waited patiently for someone to uncover it. Duke remained close throughout every step. The German Shepherd followed Ethan from room to room as he organized the documents, almost as if protecting the fragile pieces of the past. The cottage felt different now. What once seemed like an abandoned building surrounded by silence had become a place filled with meaning. Ethan spent the morning reviewing every document he had found. He carefully separated personal letters from official records and placed each item in protective folders. The more he read, the clearer the story became. The Whitaker family had collected valuable items over many years, but they had also preserved countless reminders of their lives. There were handwritten recipes, family photographs, military letters, and journals describing simple moments that had once filled the cottage with warmth. Among those records was a detailed inventory written almost 100 years earlier. It described several stored items that had been placed beneath the property for protection. Some were family heirlooms. Others were rare pieces with significant historical value. Ethan realized that the hidden fortune mentioned in the documents was not only about money. It was about preserving pieces of a family that time had nearly erased. Later that week, a local historian named Margaret Ellis arrived at the cottage after reviewing copies of the documents. She walked through the old rooms carefully, studying the photographs and journals with genuine admiration. She explained that many historical properties lost their personal stories because records disappeared over time. What Ethan had found was unusual because the documents created a connection between the objects and the people who once owned them. Together, Ethan and Margaret reviewed the map from the hidden chamber. The markings showed another sealed area beneath the property where additional items were believed to be stored. Before opening anything further, Margaret recommended contacting professional specialists who could verify the contents properly. Ethan agreed immediately. He had no interest in claiming something that might belong to others. His years of service had taught him that responsibility came before reward. While waiting for the specialists to arrive, Ethan continued restoring the cottage. He repaired old shelves, cleaned the wooden floors, and fixed small details that had been neglected for decades. Duke watched every activity with calm curiosity, often resting near the fireplace where the mystery had first begun. One evening, Ethan sat on the porch while the sun disappeared behind the mountains. He looked at the cottage, the land, and the loyal companion beside him. He thought about how different his life had become. He moved there searching for peace, expecting nothing more than a quiet place to start over. Instead, he had found a connection to people he had never met and a story that reached across generations. When the specialists finally arrived, they carefully examined the hidden materials and confirmed that several items appeared to have remarkable historical and financial significance. However, they also explained that a complete evaluation would take time. Ethan accepted the news without hesitation. The value of the discovery was no longer the number attached to it. The true value was knowing that something forgotten could finally be restored. As the evening breeze moved through the trees, Duke stood beside Ethan near the cottage door. The German Shepherd looked toward the old home that had revealed so many secrets. Ethan smiled and gently placed a hand on his companion's shoulder. The greatest treasure was not waiting beneath the floor or hidden behind stone. It was the journey that brought a forgotten story back into the light. The specialists continued their careful examination of the hidden materials beneath the forgotten cottage, and Ethan Callaway watched every step with the same patience he had shown since the beginning. The veteran understood that history could not be rushed. Every document, every photograph, and every preserved item carried a story that deserved respect. Duke remained beside him throughout the process, quietly observing the visitors as they moved through the old rooms and carefully studied the discoveries that had been hidden for generations. The German Shepherd had started this journey by noticing what everyone else overlooked, and now he remained a calm reminder of where it all began. Over the following weeks, experts carefully reviewed the collection found beneath the cottage. They examined old records, compared family names, and searched through historical archives to understand where each item belonged. What they discovered surprised everyone. The hidden collection was connected to several branches of the Whitaker family who had moved across different parts of the country many decades earlier. Some relatives had lost contact over time, while others had no idea that important family possessions were still preserved inside the old cottage. Ethan listened carefully as the experts explained the findings. The value of certain items was significant, but the deeper meaning came from the stories attached to them. A small collection of handwritten letters revealed personal moments from a family separated by distance. Old photographs showed generations of people standing outside the same cottage where Ethan now lived. Each piece created another connection between the past and the present. One afternoon, Margaret Ellis returned with additional information from her research. She had located several descendants of the original family through historical records. Many of them were surprised to learn that the cottage still existed and that their family history had been preserved there for so many years. Ethan watched their reactions as they saw the photographs and documents for the first time. The emotions in the room were not about wealth. They were about remembering people who had almost disappeared from history. One descendant held an old family photograph and smiled softly. Another carefully read a handwritten letter that had been written decades before they were born. The cottage, once forgotten by the world, was becoming a place where memories were returning home. Ethan knew that the discoveries could have changed his life financially. The estimated value of the collection was far beyond anything he had imagined when he first moved there. But the veteran had never believed that something found by chance automatically belonged to him. He had found a responsibility, not just an opportunity. When the legal process began to determine ownership and proper restoration, Ethan remained patient. He provided every document he had discovered and supported the efforts to reconnect the collection with the families who had a rightful connection to it. The community around the cottage also began to take interest. Local residents visited to learn about the history that had been hidden in their own backyard for nearly a century. They saw Ethan not as someone who discovered a fortune, but as someone who helped return a forgotten story to the people connected to it. As the seasons changed, the old cottage slowly transformed. The garden was restored, the wooden porch was repaired, and the rooms that once felt empty began to feel alive again. Duke often rested beside the front steps, watching visitors arrive with peaceful curiosity. Ethan would sit beside him in the evening and think about everything that had happened. He came to the cottage searching for a quiet place to rebuild his own life. Instead, he became part of a story that had been waiting almost 100 years to continue. The hidden fortune beneath the cottage was valuable, but the greatest discovery was something no one could measure. It was the reminder that honesty could restore more than possessions. It could restore connections, memories, and the feeling of belonging that time had nearly taken away. The old cottage beside the Montana woods was no longer a forgotten place. Months after Ethan Calloway first arrived, the quiet property had become a gathering place filled with stories, memories, and connections that stretched across generations. The wooden porch that once carried the marks of time had been carefully restored. The garden that had disappeared beneath years of neglect slowly returned with new life. Every corner of the cottage seemed to hold a piece of the history that Ethan and Duke had uncovered together. The German Shepherd still followed Ethan through the familiar rooms, but now there was something different in the way he moved. Duke no longer searched for hidden secrets. He simply enjoyed the peaceful home he had helped reveal. The community had taken great interest in the cottage and the story behind it. Local historians worked with residents to preserve the property as an example of the importance of protecting personal history. The documents discovered beneath the floor and behind the hidden walls became part of a carefully organized archive, allowing future generations to understand the lives of the people who once called the cottage home. Ethan watched the transformation with quiet appreciation. He never expected that a simple decision to move into an old house would lead him into a story nearly 100 years in the making. The veteran had arrived looking for a place to start over, but instead he found a connection to people he had never met and memories that had survived through time. One afternoon, Margaret Ellis invited Ethan to attend a small community gathering at the cottage. Descendants of the Whitaker family arrived from different parts of the country, carrying their own photographs and stories to share. For many of them, the visit was the first time they had seen the place where their relatives had created so many memories. As they walked through the rooms, they recognized details from old family pictures. A doorway, a window, the fireplace where generations had gathered during colder seasons. The cottage was no longer just a building. It had become a bridge between the past and the present. Ethan stood quietly near the edge of the room while families exchanged stories. He noticed Duke sitting peacefully beside him, watching everyone with gentle curiosity. The loyal German Shepherd had been the first to sense that something important was hidden beneath the surface. Yet Ethan understood that Duke had discovered more than a hidden fortune. He had helped uncover a forgotten connection between people, places, and memories. Later that evening, Ethan walked with Duke along the edge of the property. The lake reflected the fading colors of the sunset, and the same trees that surrounded the cottage when he first arrived continued to stand quietly around them. Ethan thought about how different everything felt now. The cottage had once seemed like a lonely place left behind by time. Now it felt like a home filled with purpose. He remembered the first morning when Duke stopped beside the old floorboards and waited patiently for him to notice. At the time, Ethan had no idea where that small moment would lead. The journey had brought him hidden rooms, forgotten records, and a fortune that carried far more meaning than money. But the greatest gift had been something much simpler. It was the reminder that every place, every person, and every life could hold a story waiting to be heard. As winter approached, the cottage stood warm against the quiet landscape. A small light glowed through the windows each evening, welcoming anyone who came searching for history and connection. Ethan sat beside the fireplace with Duke resting nearby, grateful for the unexpected path that brought them there. The hidden fortune had changed many lives, but the bond between a veteran and his German Shepherd had revealed something even greater. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries are not the things we find beneath the ground. They are the moments that help us find where we truly belong. Years passed, but the story of the forgotten cottage beside the Montana woods continued to live in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed its transformation. What began as a simple decision by Ethan Calloway to find a quiet place to rebuild his life became a journey that connected generations, restored memories, and revealed the incredible bond between a veteran and his loyal German Shepherd. The cottage that once stood unnoticed behind overgrown trees became a symbol of hope, honesty, and the importance of remembering where we come from. Ethan never considered himself the owner of the story. He always believed he was simply the person who had been trusted to bring it back into the light. The hidden collection beneath the cottage had been carefully preserved and shared with the families connected to its history. Many items returned to descendants who had spent years knowing only pieces of their family stories. The old photographs, letters, and records became treasures not because of their financial value, but because they carried voices from the past. Each restored item reminded people that ordinary lives could leave extraordinary marks behind. The cottage itself became a place where visitors came to learn about history and the importance of protecting memories. Ethan often walked through the restored rooms and remembered the first days after arriving. He remembered the quiet floors, the dusty windows, and the feeling that the old home was waiting for someone to understand it. Most of all, he remembered Duke standing beside the living room floor, patiently guiding him toward the first hidden clue. The German Shepherd was older now, moving a little slower but still carrying the same calm spirit that had defined him from the beginning. Duke no longer searched the cottage for secrets. He spent his days resting near the fireplace, walking through the garden, and enjoying the peaceful home he had helped uncover. Ethan would often sit beside him in the evenings, looking across the property and thinking about the unexpected path their lives had taken. He moved to the cottage hoping to find a place where he could begin again. Instead, he found a purpose that reached beyond himself. He discovered that healing could come from unexpected places, and sometimes a forgotten corner of the world could remind someone what truly mattered. One autumn evening, Ethan walked with Duke along the edge of the lake as golden leaves covered the ground around them. The cottage lights glowed warmly in the distance, reflecting on the quiet water. Ethan stopped for a moment and looked back at the home that had once seemed lost to time. It was no longer forgotten. It carried the laughter of visitors, the stories of families reunited, and the memory of a loyal dog who noticed what everyone else missed. Duke looked up at Ethan, and the veteran smiled softly. No words were needed. Their journey had always been built on trust. The hidden fortune beneath the cottage had changed many lives, but it was never the greatest treasure they found. The greatest treasure was the friendship that guided them through every discovery, every challenge, and every quiet moment along the way. The old cottage remained standing among the trees, not as a forgotten place, but as a reminder that every home has a story, every memory has value, and every act of loyalty can reveal something extraordinary. Some discoveries are measured in gold. Others are measured in the hearts they touch. And sometimes, the smallest sign from a faithful companion can lead someone to the greatest gift they were never searching for.